What's up, I'm the Mushroom. Welcome to the channel. Welcome back if you've been here before. Today, we're playing some Modern, and the deck we're playing is 5-color Creativity. If you're not familiar, we're actually in round 5 of an FNM at one of my local game stores. It's Upkeep. You don't know about it unless you're from Southeast Michigan, so don't worry too much about it. Like I said, this is round 5. We are currently 3-1. We've beaten Murktide. We beat 4-color Omnath Bring to Light. We lost to the Mirror Match, and then we beat Affinity in the last episode, and today we're playing against Mike Russo, who is playing Burn, and that's everything you should need to know. Oh, if you don't know anything about 5-color Creativity, because it is kind of a complicated deck, check out this video right here. It's also in the description. It's just a primer on how the deck works, how the deck's built, card selection, stuff like that. And if you want to check out my sideboard guide and stuff, you've got to become a patron. Check that out in the description below if you're interested. Now that's everything you should need to know. So let's go to game number 1. Game 1. Russo wins the die roll and chooses to be on the play, and we're both keeping 7-card hands. Mine is Scalding Tarn, Bloodstained Mire, Sacred Foundry, Lightning Bolt, Prismatic Ending, Red and 6, and Leyline Binding. This is a solid 7 for this matchup. We'd really rather the Red and 6 be a Spell Pierce, but there's no way we can ship an interactive 7 with functioning mana. Russo was also nice enough to show the camera his opening hand, meaning you all get to know that he kept a Sacred Foundry, a Sunbaked Canyon, Goblin Guide, 2 Monastery Swift Spear, and 2 Searing Blaze. This 7 is quite good for Russo in this matchup. The Searing Blazes will be very good if I pull the trigger on Creativity too soon. The only awkward thing about the hand is I happen to have interaction for all 3 of Russo's creatures, but he has no way of knowing that, so it's an easy keep. Turn 1. Russo shocks in Sacred Foundry, dropping to 18 and plays Goblin Guide. Then he heads to combat and attacks for 2, triggering the Goblin Guide. I'll reveal Archon off the top, take 2, dropping to 18, and he passes to me where I just play Scalding Tarn and pass back. Russo then plays Sunbaked Canyon, casts Monastery Swift Spear, and then taps the Sunbaked Canyon, dropping to 17 to play another Swift Spear. He'll then attack for 4, trigger the Goblin Guide. I reveal Ren and 6 off the top, then take 4 from damage, dropping to 14, and at the end of Russo's turn, I fetch, dropping to 13 for a Jetmir's Garden. Then I'll shock in Sacred Foundry, dropping to 11, and cast Prismatic Ending for 1, targeting a Swift Spear to exile it. Then I cast Lightning Bolt to destroy the other Swift Spear, and I pass to Russo. Russo plays Arid Mesa, then attacks me with the Goblin Guide and triggers it to reveal a Dwarven Mine, so I add that card to my hand. I'll take 2, dropping to 9, and Russo passes, so I'll play Bloodstained Mire and try to pass right back, but at the end of my turn, Russo's going to draw a card by sacrificing Sunbaked Canyon. Then Russo fetches, dropping to 16 for a tapped Sacred Foundry. He plays Scalding Tarn as his land for turn and drops another Goblin Guide. Then I'll attack me with both guides, triggering both guides, and the first trigger reveals Arid Mesa, so I'll add it to hand. The second trigger reveals Teferi, so it will stay on top of my deck. Before damage, I'll fetch to 8 for Xander's Lounge, and then cast Leyline Binding to exile one of the Goblin Guides and take 2 from the other one, dropping to 6. Then we go to my turn, where I play Teferi Time Raveler, but in response, Russo fetches down to 15 for a Mountain and casts Skullcrack, dropping me down to 3. Then Teferi resolves, so I'll down ticket to bounce Goblin Guide and draw a card. I'll play Dwarven Mine. Dwarven Mine triggers, so I get a Dwarf, and I'll pass to Russo. Russo starts by casting Searing Blaze with no landfall to kill a Dwarf and deal 1 to me, dropping me to 2. Then he plays that Goblin Guide and attacks, which triggers, and we reveal Indomitable Creativity. Before damage, I bolt the Goblin, and then he passes to me, where I play Dwarven Mine, trigger the Dwarven Mine to get a Dwarf, and cast Creativity. Creativity is going to reveal Archon, which triggers, so I'll go up to 5. Russo goes down to 12. Russo has no creatures to sacrifice, but he discards a Searing Blaze. Then I draw a card, I tick up Teferi, and I pass to Russo, who draws and then concedes because he cannot beat a resolved Archon. We are going to game 2. The sideboard plan for Burn is very simple. We're going to start by removing 4 copies of Red and 6 from our deck, and this is kind of weird. This is one of the only matchups where we actually lose Red and 6, but this matchup plays out so quickly that we don't have time to really do anything with the Red and 6. We're also going to cut 2 copies of Expressive Iteration for kind of the same reason. If we ever tap out to cast an Expressive Iteration, we're likely just going to die when we pass the turn. To replace these cards, we'll start by bringing in 4 copies of Change the Equation. There's really not a lot to say here. Change just literally counters every single spell in their deck, so in this matchup it functions exactly like Counterspell. We're also bringing in 2 copies of Nature's Claim in order to destroy our opponent's Whirling Vortexes, as well as to destroy our own Leyline Bindings and Fable of the Mirror Breakers. Obviously, when we target one of our enchantments, we're the ones that gain 4 life, and in a matchup where our opponent's deck is literally just trying to deal 20 damage to us, gaining 4 in a pinch can be very helpful. Russo lost game 1, so he's going to choose to be on the play for game 2, and we're both going to take a mulligan to 6. Our first hand is 2 Archon of Cruelty, 1 Teferi, 1 Fable, 2 Arid Mesas, and a Sacred Foundry. Any hand with multiple copies of Archon of Cruelty 3 is an automatic mulligan. They're 8 drops and we can't really plan to hardcast them against burn. We're going to keep our 6 card hand, which is Lightning Bolt, change the equation, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, 2 Scalding Tarn, 1 Mountain, and we're bottoming a copy of Dwarven Mine. This hand's great. We've got Interaction, Counter Magic, a mid-game plan in Fable of the Mirror Breaker, and mana to cast all of our spells. Turn 1. Russo plays Arid Mesa, fetches and shocks down to 17 for a Sacred Foundry, and casts Lava Spike targeting me. I go to 17 and he passes. I'll play Scalding Tarn and pass the turn right back. Russo's going to play a Scalding Tarn of his own, fetch and shock, dropping to 14 for a Sacred Foundry, and cast Sanctifier in Vec. He'll try to pass the turn, but at the end of his turn, I'll fetch to 16 for a Xander's Lounge. I'll play Scalding Tarn and pass back to Russo, who heads straight for combat and attacks me for 2, dropping me to 14. He'll try to pass, but at the end of his turn, I'll fetch, dropping to 13 for a tapped Jetmir's Garden. I'll play a Mountain and try to pass the turn again, but at the end of my turn, Russo's going to cast Lightning Helix, targeting me. In response, I'll cast Spell Pierce to counter it. Russo then plays Monastery Swiftspear and attacks me for 3. Before damage, I'll bolt the Swiftspear and then take 2 from Sanctifier, dropping to 11. Then we'll go to my turn, where I play Wooded Foothills, fetch to 10 for a Dwarven Mine, trigger the Dwarven Mine to get a Dwarf, and cast Fable. We'll trigger the Fable to get a Goblin, and I'll try to pass, but at the end of my turn, Russo's going to try to bolt the Goblin. In response, I'll Spell Pierce the Bolt. Then Russo heads straight for combat and attacks me for 2 at the Sanctifier, which has Pro Red, so I can't block, so I take 2 and drop to 8. Then we go to my turn, where in my first main phase, I trigger Chapter 2 of Fable, and I'll pitch 1 Scalding Tarn to draw 1 card. Then I'll go to combat and attack for 3, triggering the Goblin to make a treasure. Russo takes 3, dropping to 11, and then I play a Bloodstained Mire and try to pass, but at the end of my turn, Russo casts Searing Blaze, targeting my Dwarf, and in response, I'll counter with Change the Equation. Russo heads for combat and attacks me for 2, dropping me to 6, and then tries to pass back, but at the end of his turn, I'll fetch, dropping to 5 for a Dwarven Mine, trigger the Dwarven Mine to get a Dwarf. Then I'll draw for turn, and it's literally the creativity I need to win this game. I'll flip Fable into Reflections of Kiki Jiki and go to combat and attack for 4, dropping Russo to 7, and I'll make a treasure off of the Goblin. Then I'll cast Creativity for 2, targeting 2 of my Dwarves. In response, Russo casts Boros Charm, which brings me down to 1, but then Creativity resolves and I get 2 Archons. Both trigger, so I gain 6, going up to 7, and Russo takes 6, going down to 1. Then Russo and I forget about the sacrifice part of the Archon trigger, so he keeps Sanctifier in Vec and discards Skewer the Critics and Exquisite Firecraft. I'll draw 2 cards and pass to Russo, who heads for combat and attacks for 2 with the apparently invincible Sanctifier in Vec, and he passes back to me, where I attack for the win. We won this game 2-0, giving us an overall record of 4-1 for this event. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I will see you next time.